now being recorded.
Yeah. So, Vigyan, you have to now mute your microphone, and I'm getting to that screen. So you can see. So Econometrics I. So till now, you people have studied what? Microeconomics, okay, macroeconomics, mathematical economics, next was your statistics. Then you also studied development economics. So the core of economics discipline are these two subjects, microeconomics, macroeconomics. And to understand the mathematical nuances of the microeconomic or macroeconomic theory, you study mathematical economics and statistics. Development economics is basically nothing but it's an application of all core subjects in economics. Okay, so these are application of all core subjects in economics. Fine, very good. So we have studied about the theories. They have given the theories. But how do we know that whether the theories, what they have said, is right or not? Okay. So that means if you have to test whether this theory is right or not, you need some methodology or technique. Now, drawing from statistics, where you also discussed about correlation, regression, and then time series. You also like to study the relationship between different economic variables. Okay, you need to study about different economic variables. Fine. So this is what we need to discuss: relationship between different economic variables, methodology, and so you need a methodology technique to test whether these theories are right or wrong, and you also need to study out the relationship between different economic variables. Next, you'd also like to evaluate public policies. So let's say you'd like to see whether a particular government policy is achieving its desired outcome or not, and how much it has been effective in achieving the desired outcome. So for all these requirements, you need a certain methodology or technique that helps you to address all these objectives which you have in mind. And this is being done by the study of econometrics. So basically, econometrics is nothing but it is a set of statistical methods from mathematical statistics. Okay, developed to estimate so it's a set of statistical methods to estimate various economic variables, test the economic theories, that is the validity of economic theories, then estimate different economic relationships, and finally to evaluate and implement various policies. Okay. So it is nothing but a state of statistical methods which is derived from mathematical statistics, which have been developed to estimate various economic variables, test the economic theories, estimate economic relationships, and evaluate and implement various policies. Understand that econometrics is not just statistical methods. So whatever you have studied in statistical methods, basically they are applied also for economics, but they are not specially tailored or they are not specially developed for economics as a discipline. Econometrics is a study of statistical methods which are being used or developed solely for the discipline of economics for the different purposes that I have mentioned or outlined. Now, why there was a need of having a separate discipline of econometrics when we already had a well-established statistical discipline and within it mathematical statistics as a subdiscipline? Because when you are testing any theory or estimating any various relationships or evaluating or implementing various policies, you require what? You require data. Without data, you cannot go for any empirical analysis. So data is something, and the nature of the data determines the methodology to be applied or implemented. Keep this thing in mind very clearly. The type of data you are getting, the nature of the data will determine what methodology you need to apply or implement for answering various questions which you have in your mind. This is very important, and key and ingrain this thing within yourself. This is very important. For empirical analysis, you require data, and the type of the data and the nature of the data will determine the methodology that needs to be applied. It's not just the other way around. Depending on the methodology, you will collect the data. No. Depending on the data, you will see what methodology needs to be applied or implemented. Keep this thing in mind very, very clearly. This is something which is very important. Okay. Now, basically, when we talk about econometric data for economics or the economic data, they are basically non-experimental data. So typically, what do we mean by non-experimental data? Data which is derived from any non-experimental, phenomenon or some non-experimental setup or from some non-experimental observation. So this non-experimental data is also known something as an observational data. Observational data. Okay. It is also known as retrospective data. You only collect this data after it has happened. You don't collect, you are not actually waiting for the data to be collected, but you collect the data as you observe it in a non-experimental setup. So this differs from what? This differs from any laboratory data. Economic data differs from laboratory data in the sense that in laboratory you set up experiments from where you collect this experimental data. Okay, and then you can use the typical statistical methods to analyze those data. So which you have already learned to some extent in your statistics course. Measures of central tendency, then measures of dispersion, then different moments of the data, different distributions. So these, for this experimental data, you can actually use the statistical methods. But when it comes to non-experimental or observational or retrospective data, you can only use econometric methods. Okay. So this is the starting point or difference between econometrics or mathematical statistics or statistical methods. Fine. Now, the next question. Okay. Now the next question, just a minute. Hang on. Okay. Now the next question which will come is this: how? So what are the steps in econometrics? What are the steps in econometrics or empirical analysis? So what are the different steps in econometrics or empirical analysis? So how do you begin these steps? So how do you make the, how do you have to set up the question of interest? This is the first step in any econometric analysis or any empirical analysis, irrespective of you are doing analysis of an observational data or non-experimental data or experimental. You have to set up the question of interest. Now, when it comes to econometrics, that means when you are doing empirical economic analysis, you can have either of the three objectives in mind. That is, you want to test the economic theory, you want to estimate different economic relationships, or you may want to evaluate a public policy or a business policy. So these are three categories of broad categories of queries which you can have. Now, when you have to narrow down that query or the scope of the query, you have to set up a particular question of interest. That is the first step. So let's say you would like to see that what is the demand or what are the demand functions of x and y.
Sir.
So how do you find it? Pardon?
Sir, this is a separate question, sir. What is the demand function of x and y?
No, this is the question of interest. What are the demand functions of x and y? Okay,
Oh,
I'm giving an example.
sir, means it is the sub point of number one. Example.
Example.
Oh, yes. Sir, okay. Understood.
What are the demand functions of x and y? So how do you get the demand functions of x and y? So first of all, what you had in consumer behavior? So first of all, you had a utility function. Then you had the what? Budget constraint. Then subject to, then you did what? Maximization using optimization techniques, constant optimization technique. So utility maximization. And once you do the utility maximization, so the first order conditions, you get the first order conditions. And from the first order conditions, you try to derive the demand functions of x and y. Okay. So that means you need to set up what? First of all, you need to set up a formal economic model. You need to set up a formal economic model. So this is the first step. So you have to first fix what is your question of interest, number one. After you set up the question of interest, next you will have to see that how you can set up this formal economic model. Okay. So now I'll give a very more specific example. Okay. I'll give a more specific example, that is economic model of crime. Okay. So here we are trying to formulate a theory of economic model of crime. So what do? We now create a theory, we formulate a model. So where we still y is something known as the hours of criminal activity. Okay, which we make function of what? Which we make function of, let's say, x1, which is wage rate from criminal activity, x2, which is, let's say, wages from other non-criminal activities. Okay, then these are certain a. Then x1, x2, then x3, that is what is the probability of being caught, x4. Then what is the probability of being convicted once you are being caught, and let's say x5, what is the length of punishment or the quantum of punishment once you have been convicted. Okay, so this is the formal economic model which we have created, though we are not getting any specific functional form. Okay, we are not getting any specific functional form. Fine. So we are just making this as a general functional form. So this is nothing but a general functional form, where y, that is hours of criminal activity, is a dependent variable, and these are the determinants of the independent variables, x1, x2, x3, x4, and x5. Very good. So now we will have to hypothesize. So this is, now we will say that how this model is. So we can say that higher the rewards from criminal activity, higher will be hours of employment. And higher the rewards from non-criminal activities, lower will be the. So this way we create the formal economic model. It is not necessary that we every time have to put a specific functional form, but we can also, using the general functional form, we can create this economic model of crime. Similarly, we would like to see economic model of job training. Okay. Economic model of job training. So here we'll say, what is your income as a labor, as a worker, which is a function of whether you have taken any training or not. Okay. What are your educational qualification? Educational qualification. And then what are your other abilities? Which are your innate abilities or given abilities? Okay. Then also how many years of experience you have, work experience. So again, we form this as a, okay, one more thing also we can add is your age. Okay. So again, we can create a formal economic model of job training whereby we say that this is the, why is the income level, and it is a function of what? It is a function of whether you have received any training or not. What are your educational qualifications? What are your abilities? That is your skill set. Then how many years of experience you have, work experience, and what is your age. So when you are forming the question of interest, to support the question of interest, you need to set up a formal economic model. Either it can have a specifics, or you can also form a general model. Now, after you have formed this economic model, next you need to convert. Just a minute. You need to convert the economic model to econometric model. That means now you have to go from the theoretical model to its empirical counterpart. Okay. So this is how you actually form the model. So from this theoretical model to its empirical counterpart. Fine. Now, if I take this example of, this economic model of job training. So we already have this theoretical model, F of age, experience, training, education, and abilities. Okay, so this is my what? Theoretical model. Now I have to get what? The econometric or the empirical model. Fine. Now, when you have to get the empirical model, keep this thing in mind that you have to formulate the empirical model based on the data you collect. Sometimes it may happen that some of these variables which you have formulated in the theoretical model or which you have considered in the theoretical model, you may not have the empirical data for the same. Then in that situation, you may need to use proxy data. That means that data which is not exactly capturing the value of that variable, but some other variable which is somewhat associated with that unobserved variable. So proxy data may need to be used. So when you are formulating, let's say, an empirical model, you need to keep in mind that you can only consider those variables in the empirical model for which you have got the data. So for that, you may have to deviate from the theoretical model which you have created. Keep this thing in mind very clearly. Theoretical model may not be able to reflect or highlight the empirical model may not be able to reflect or highlight all the variables which are considered in the theoretical model because of the drawbacks that are involved or the limitations that are involved in collecting data on all the variables. Now, if I see in case here, let's say if I want to write, so let's say I'm now finding the empirical model. So you're already familiar with linear regression. So linear regression, you have written some equation and then you estimated that equation. So let's say this is my theoretical model, beta 0 plus beta 1 age plus beta 2 experience plus beta 3 education plus. Now how will you capture abilities? So abilities, it's very difficult to capture. Okay, so you can have, so you have to give now what you have to now give training beta 4 training. So you can capture whether you have 0 or 1 if you have trained, 1 if you have not been trained, 0 plus u. So this u is nothing but error term, and this u contains all those variables which are unobserved. Okay, which are unobserved, number 1. Number 2, for which are unobserved and independent of observed variables. So whatever you are not able to capture, but they are whatever variables you are not able to observe or capture the data, and provided that they are independent of the observed variables, then you include them in this error term. So this is now your empirical model. So now you have got from step 1 to step 2. Okay.
Sir.
Yes.
Sir, actually, sir, can you give me 5 minutes, sir?